that because of its energy, and because of the fact that it's this monumental or life-size image of a horse, it really seems to have caught the public imagination over the centuries and spawned all kinds of stories, the best of which came about when the work was first shown. And it was claimed that Whistlejacket himself was confronted by this canvas when Stubbs was painting it out in the paddock just as he was finishing it, and the horse saw it, reared up and tried to kick it, and together with the stable lad, Stubbs had to restrain him, and apparently he beat him with his mahl stick and his pallet. I think that's pretty ludicrous, though, not least because can you imagine a canvas of this size out in a muddy paddock and a painter like Stubbs having to wrestle with it? I think it's clear that he sketched and drew him and observed very closely this horse as it was paraded to and fro in front of him, but that clearly the canvas itself was completed in Stubbs's studio. But what we're left with is this extraordinary image of vitality and vigour, of a horse that has been very successful on the racecourse, but now is out to stud and has this amazing virility, if you like. It's also a work that seems incredibly composed. The image is taut, it's pulled in by its frame. Look at the tail, the way it lifts up to give balance. Look at the way the pointed ears that are there. Look at the expression on the face, the flash in the eye. It's an image of absolute perfect poise, but at the same time, it threatens to burst out of the frame. And it's that, I think, that sense of almost abstract, taut energy that gives the painting its ongoing power.
By 1762, when Stubbs was 38, he'd emerged as the leading sporting artist of the day. The problem, though, was the art establishment, because for them, painting was an intellectual pursuit and the result of imagination, as well as the acute powers of observation that Stubbs brought to it. The landscape of the racetrack and of the stables was restrictive, and so Stubbs had to look further afield. The Creswell Crags are an isolated rock formation on the borders of Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire, a rugged landscape of limestone cliffs whose drama and beauty perfectly conformed to the emerging idea of the picturesque, and which gave Stubbs a more natural setting in which he could depict his horses, but where they could also be exposed to the more savage forces of nature. Now, the landscape of Creswell Crags provided the backdrop for a series that eventually numbered 17, of which this is an early example, that one art historian called Animal History. And it shows a lion going through various stages of attacking a horse. And I think probably, it could be argued, that for the first time in his career, Stubbs puts the landscape in first before the animals then populate the picture. And here you see the horse recoiling in fear as out of the darkness comes this lion. Now, in the series, there are 4 stages of the narrative. The first is the lion at distance, frightening the horse. Then he's moving in closer. Then thirdly, he attacks. And then fourthly, the horse sinks under the weight as the lion puts teeth and claws into the flesh of the poor horse. Now, the precedents for this were classical. In Rome, on the Capitoline Hill, there was an antique sculpture of a lion attacking a horse. It's pretty clear that Stubbs had seen that. It's also pretty clear that he's trying to elevate sporting painting and give it something of the status of classical art or grand style art. But he's also, in these works, putting himself forward as a painter of the imagination as well as someone who looks and observes. Because although it was perfectly plausible that he'd seen a lion at one of his patrons' menageries, Lord Shelbourne had a lion at his house on Hounslow Heath, nonetheless, Stubbs could never have seen a lion attacking a horse. And what he's also trying to do is put forward an idea that was philosophically very strong at the time, namely that of the sublime. The idea of the sublime, written by the philosopher Edmund Burke, published first in 1759, was the awe and the terror that human beings feel when they're confronted by the awesome power of nature. This is usually made manifest in storms, particularly at sea, and Turner later on became a great exponent of the sublime in painting. Here, in something that seems slightly more populist, Stubbs has the idea of the sublime force of a wild animal and the fear the horse feels when confronted by it. And so in a way, what he's doing here is managing to combine high art theory with the more popular tastes of the day. And in fact, these paintings and the prints that he made and a relief he did for Wedgwood pottery of the same subject were amongst the most popular works that he ever produced. Stubbs was also commissioned to paint a number of other wild animals which were just arriving in Britain, the trophies of a newly powerful and growing empire. And this image of a cheetah, sent as a gift to George III from a former Governor-General of Madras, commemorates an event that took place in Windsor Great Park, in which the cheetah was set loose on a stag in order to observe its hunting technique. In the end, the experiment was a failure, though, as the stag easily defended itself. In Stubbs' painting, though, there is a sense of the exotic, both animal and human, and Stubbs paints both the cheetah and its Indian attendants with equal drama and attention to detail.
But Stubbs' main source of income was still painting portraits of horses for wealthy clients, and in 1765 he began a series set on Newmarket Racecourse, beginning with an extraordinary pair of landscapes populated by no horses and no human beings, of which this is perhaps the most poignant example. It's a real gem of a painting, and it shows here on the left-hand side what's called a rubbing down house, where the horses were bought after a race or after exercise, and they were rubbed down with either cloths or bits of straw to get the sweat off them. And you have this amazing sense of distance where you see these two viewing stands and this post in the middle, like a tower, which in fact is a betting post, but the whole painting reverberates with a sense of emptiness. This is the line, the track up which the horses will race. But Stubbs manages to give the racecourse almost a kind of mythical feel. But this is also a kind of formal exercise, where Stubbs is establishing the backdrop, and then, in the next painting, he puts the horses in.
In Gimcrack on Newmarket Heath, Stubbs has shown both the aftermath of the race in the foreground and the race itself. So this is a really archaic presentation of the subject, in defiance of the normal unities of time and place. In the 18th century, racing drew enormous crowds from the many different stratas of society, and the racecourse was the venue for frantic betting, boxing and cockfighting. The crowds would line the course, leaving only enough space for the horses to pass through. But these elements are entirely absent in Stubbs's vision of Newmarket. But he was much less of a documentary painter and more interested in the drama and the spirit of the occasion.
In 1785, Stubbs produced this pair of paintings that shows just how much he wanted to broaden the subject matter of his art. This is called The Reapers,
And this is The Haymakers.
and the two works sit wonderfully well together. There's a continual line, if you like, of action, and you could reverse them and create a kind of pyramid from the trees or the landscape in the background. And what Stubbs is doing here is showing the rural world at work. It's a kind of daily or mundane occurrence. Now, there's plenty of precedence for this subject matter in art, but the workers tend to be sentimentalised. I don't think Stubbs does that, but I think what he does do is idealise them slightly. They all